Moving right along, I'm sorry I interrupted you, Mr. Repay. Please introduce the presentation for the Little Calumet Conservation Collaborative for the Marshalltown Marsh Design Plan.
Well, that wasn't even my introduction, but it's what I just said previous. The good folks here, where we got Paul and Daniel, will be giving a presentation, and hopefully they've logged in, because if they haven't, then they'll get criticized like I do. And then we'll talk about the 60% design of the Marshalltown area as how they envision it and how they got from you guys and from me as to what they want to see there with the meander and some high ground.
So this design isn't coming through your office. This is just what the collaborative thinks that they want to see.
Well, but we also talked to them, I've talked to them, and you guys have given your 2 cents a little bit, but now they want 2 more cents just to make sure that they're on the right glide path. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think that's a decent summary. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mr. President and Commissioners. I'm Paul Botts with the Wetlands Initiative, the Calumet River Collaborative. My good colleague here, Daniel Suarez, is going to join me in a moment with some details. I'm here to just kind of actually remind you all of what we're looking at. And this slide that's on the screen here, you ought to recognize from when we were here in April, and we did a sort of an overall project update of all the stuff that's in the works. So now we're just tunneling in on that one piece, the Marshalltown piece, which is in the light pink on that slide there. As you can see, it's a good sized piece. We've been working on this at mostly at the design level for a number of years. You will recall that a few years ago, one of the things that we decided to do with your concurrence was to bring in a certain team of the Chicago District Army Corps, not the approval team, not the permitting team, but they have a design, project design team there, came in, did a formal feasibility level look at this, at the idea of doing, as Dan mentioned, some remeandering in there, using the spoils to create some higher grounds, naturalize it. It's, of course, one of the Army Corps folks to look at it and say, okay, yes, you can do that. Here, make sure you do it in this way to not cause the problems that, of course, we all are very familiar with. And they did that, gave us that thumbs up. So what we've done that Daniel is going to take you some more through on some specifics, and there's kind of some upcoming milestones on, is that 60% design. We did bring in outside funding, so neither your dime nor ours paid for that, which is great. And that 60% design is almost done. It's going to be a formal report very soon, I think in days or even at most for a couple of weeks. And of course, we're going to collect everybody's feedback on that. And then what Daniel's going to show to you is that we have a very exciting opportunity to fund both the 100% design step, but also potentially start funding the implementation. And the important thing to know about that is that, again, will be all entirely funding outside of this body and our organizations. We are not here today to request a big additional match in addition to the generous support that the commission has been providing for all of this work. And so this is, from my seat, this is an example of what we told you about in April, of all the outside funding that we've already brought in is about to take a big step forward in dollars and in exciting work on the ground and for and with the community. So with that, let me turn it over to Daniel to walk you through some of the specifics, and then I'll come back and we'll be happy to take any quick questions.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, commissioners. Nice to see you all again. And this time we've only got a couple of slides, so normally go in all sorts of directions, but we're pretty focused on this one today. So as Paul mentioned, we are near.
Sorry, Danny, please do the whole process for the public sector.
Yes,
state your name and who you are, please.
That's right. My name is Daniel Suarez. I'm the Senior Conservation Manager at Audubon Great Lakes, part of the Little Calumet River Conservation Collaborative.
Thank you, sir.
And the image that you see on the screen is one of the draft 60% designs that we have received from the engineers. We've been working with this engineering firm called ECT for about the last 18 months to understand the potential for restoration of habitat for birds, for people, for hydrology, for the whole west branch of the Little Calumet River. As Paul mentioned, the funding came from outside sources. There's been a lot of federal funding available through the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. And this project was funded directly through dollars that came from those bills through NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that has then given money to different entities to coordinate large projects on the ground. Our funding from NOAA was passed through the Coastal States Organization, which works to identify projects that are at the engineering and design phase across the Great Lakes Basin. They choose 4 projects that they elevate up to NOAA that they recommend for funding. So we were one of the projects chosen last year, and we are nearing this first phase of funding. So we've been meeting with the engineers pretty much monthly since then. And as you can imagine, as you all are aware, the engineering process takes many forms. First, they're kind of doing some general digging, then they're going out into the site, taking samples, taking measurements, looking at the existing on-the-ground conditions. This process, of which you see part of it on the screen here, these are the proposed future conditions, do feature in a lot of the things that Paul was talking about, looking at potentially remeandering parts of the river, trying to make it longer, slow the water down, and then also creating some new habitats that reflect actually what this area would have looked like 150 years ago, with the river channel surrounded on both sides by healthy floodplain habitat and also some marsh as well. So these designs have been in flux, and this has been an iterative process. The engineers have brought us designs, we've provided feedback, things that we would like to see them explore a little bit more or a little bit less. And as Paul mentioned, we're expecting the design by no later than the end of September, at which point we will share out that report. It'll be the designs, and it'll also be an extensive report laying out what those designs are indicating. As we know, this area is a little bit complicated in terms of land ownership. So we've got lands owned by the commission, by the city of Gary Parks, the Gary Community School Corporation, and a few private landowners as well. The designs, as I mentioned, not only look at proposed future conditions, but existing conditions. They've fleshed out potential areas for access and staging, invasive species control plans, and revegetation plans. The proposed conditions, as I mentioned, contain creating a lot of different kinds of habitat. And one key thing that we've had to kind of learn more about and incorporate into our plans is fish. And when we're working with federal dollars like these, fish passage is always going to be an integral part of assessing the connectivity, hydrologically speaking, and also, protecting our fisheries in the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan. This plan also has incorporated a pretty robust community engagement process. That funding came through a different pot of funds from NOAA, from their Coastal Habitat Restoration and Resilience for Underserved Communities program. And so we've been able to work kind of simultaneously with the engineers to give us designs. And we've been going to community members and learning about not only what you see on the screen, but that little portion at the very top is Hatcher Park, which City of Gary Park. And as we've been learning, the community has in the past and continues to value the space both for what it was and for what it could be. Although right now it's, the maintenance is just getting picked up again. We're starting to do regular mowing. The City of Gary Parks Department is out there beautifying the space and making it a little bit more welcoming to residents. And so as part of this project, we are going to be, now that we're receiving our 60% design, over the next year, we're going to sit down with community members and have some workshops, both to understand, what does and does not resonate with them in terms of this plan, but also trying to find ways of engaging residents from the Marshalltown neighborhood in the top right, from the Ironwood neighborhood in the top left. This was at one point, the Hatcher Park piece at least was a very important community asset, and we'd like for, when the project is done, for people to see in this project reflected their, or at least some, to the best of our ability, some of the hopes and dreams that they had for this site. We've recently connected with, we're presenting to you and talking about this project today. We also are, concurrently having these conversations with City of Gary officials. So We've been working with Brenda Scott Henry, who's the Director of Sustainability for the city, and with Levita Sparks Wade, who is the Gary Parks head of the department. And their teams of engineers also to understand. And we just had that meeting on Monday, and they're supportive of what we're doing and supportive of us moving on to this next phase of design. And so to think about the possible funding sources that Paul was alluding to, because we've already received funds from the government through NOAA to do this initial design, normally they will try to help you see it through full design and implementation. So right now we have two potential funding options that we're weighing right now. One of them we have a good amount of details on, and the other we're still exploring, and we're still looking to have that conversation at the end of September. But the first funding source that we are considering comes through the Great Lakes Commission. This funding would again pass through from NOAA. And important for everyone, I guess I should have maybe underlined this a little bit. There's no match requirement for this type of funding source, which is great for all of us. The Great Lakes Commission is attractive in some ways because Audubon has experience working with them at other projects. We just completed a very ambitious hydrologic connectivity project on the southeast side of Chicago with the Great Lakes Commission, and my colleagues in Western New York have worked with the Great Lakes Commission on some marsh restoration projects as well. Because as Paul alluded to, this is a big, ambitious project. We're also interested in exploring in this next iteration of design, potentially breaking this project up into phases so that it may be more fundable for federal from federal sources, which some years can be very high, other years not so high. So we want to be prepared for the funding sources that may or may not become available, and potentially look at doing it all in one fell swoop or in phases. If we were to ask the commission for anything, it would most likely be in the form of a letter of support that we could use as part of our proposal, which for the Great Lakes Commission funding is coming up on October 28th. And so that's why we really wanted to get on the agenda today. And thank you, Dan, for squeezing us in, because we wanted to have these conversations, give them opportunity to breathe, have you folks think it over and ask questions before we actually go through with it. The other source of funding is surprisingly also through NOAA. This is actually would be the same funding pot that funded our initial 60% design. And so we're comfortable working with those partners. We still don't know if there would be a match requirement there. We don't know what the due date is, but we probably would also want a letter of support from the commission to do that work as well. So we're currently weighing the Coastal States Organization funding. We're looking at our calendars right now and trying to get something set up for late September. Once we know more about that, we can probably decide which direction we want to go. And at that point, we would come back to you all and ask for a formal blessing to go forward and put in a proposal to fund the 90 to 100% design.
So a couple points I want to emphasize in there. One is I actually think that it would be great unless it's a problem for you all. I think we should just actually plan to be on the agenda for your October meeting regardless. We will have the 60% design report, and the moment we have it, you'll have it. I can give you a little preview though, that it addresses a core issue that is a core issue for all of us, and particularly this commission, which is about the impact on hydrology of that lengthening of the river channel that Daniel mentioned. And I'm not going to, first of all, I'm not an engineer, but second of all, I don't want to spoil it except to say that the engineers are actually very positive about the hydrologic and flood control impact of doing that. So that was very important. I don't even think we'd be here if we got any other answer. The other thing worth mentioning about the Great Lakes Commission is the Great Lakes Commission is an interstate body. It's been around for decades. It has two commissioners from every Great Lakes state appointed by each state's governor. And it has a lot of influence on many funding streams, not just this one, and it has some policy influence too. And one of the two commissioners for Indiana, Kay Nelson, who I know some of you know, and a couple of you know very well, and who was here, Commissioner Nelson was here in April for our presentation to you about the overall update of the project. And that was because she is extremely interested and supportive of this project. And I happen to know through her that the Great Lakes Commission's two Indiana commissioners have been actually quite unhappy with, as Kay puts it, the amount and size and sort of punch of the fundable projects that have come from Northwest Indiana to the Great Lakes Commission, and Northwest Indiana has not done very well with the Great Lakes Commission. So that is a problem for Kay that we're very happy to help her solve. So that's part of a little enthusiasm for us here in what we're doing. So with that, for now, we're happy to entertain questions, but really this is mostly just a glorified heads up for you all. And as Lisa mentioned, very soon we will have that finalized 60% design report. You'll have it that very moment. And I think we should just plan to be here in October at your meeting, unless that doesn't work for you, to really get into it and answer particular questions. But in the meantime, we're happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have one.
Okay, well, last thing, but before you do that, will you please do me a favor, Mr. Basin, put the aerial back up so we can see what we're talking about, so as the questions come up, we have a reference other than that. Thank you. Mr. Broadnex.
I think that was, the
The
other
second one.
Yeah,
Second one, that's a
that
draft.
was my question. In fact, I heard, I think Commissioner Whitaker and Chairman Baker asking a similar question I'm gonna ask. It's hard to tell from this view what's what, like what's the new meandering, like existing versus
Sure.
proposed?
So the existing, of course, is a couple of straight lines.
Right.
I mean, they're all straight.
Where are
lines. And the big one is just straight east-west. And I don't know, can you use
Can
the
you go
cursor?
to the screen?
There you go, right there. That's it. That's the
Yeah.
existing channel right there. And so the remeandering is the, the curves above it to the north. That's the channel that, or at least one version, obviously none of this is final. And that area, over here where the cursor is going now, you can see the existing channel, again, a straight line running from northeast to southwest. And those remeanders there, one difference is that in that area, which is really segmented hydrologically from the rest by the railroad tracks and the very large one-way culvert. I mean, it's a one-way barrier to fish passage, which is one of the things we want to try to fix. But in that area there that he was just pointing to, the remeanders are narrower, and actually the river to some degree within that area already wants to do it. And we've been out there, looked at the conditions, the engineers looked at the conditions. Where you really need to dig out some fill and therefore have some fill to use for topography elsewhere in the site is in that main east-west channel, the first one we looked at. So they're really different in terms of, among other things, cost of the work.
Thank you.
I have a question with regards to the enhancement of the environment. Is that contingent upon the meandering happening?
It is partly contingent on the meandering happening, yes, because slowing the water down helps the river hold more water longer, which helps the wetlands in various ways. For example, this great big dry spell we're having right now. The biota will adjust, so the bird species, the plant species, the insects, all of it. Wetlands are very flexible. They will adjust. This will be a much healthier wetland that will be much better able to withstand whether it's drought conditions or flood conditions, and adapt to it. And the meanders, many of these species adapted in the first place for situations that include the water slowing down sometimes and not always just rushing through like a giant ditch.
So, Mr. Repay, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from the Corps' original design is when we have a significant rain event, this whole area goes underwater, and that's done on purpose.
Yes.
Well, it's ultimately from the Burke study is controlled by Deep River. So Deep River is just to the east of this location. So once Deep River is rolling, nothing gets past, or very few, not much water gets past I-65, which is just off camera shot here, I think. So it's designed, that's the open field that you see flooding at I-65 and 94.
So, and that's per the Army Corps of Engineers design for that to occur.
Yep,
Correct.
And with all due respect, our interaction with the Corps since the flood of 2008 has been unique. And they don't seem very open to changing things significant like this. Has that been a ongoing conversation, not just with the environmental group, because this is a bureaucracy, as you guys know, so there's about 87 more approvals that need to happen. Has this idea been introduced to those 87, and I'm being, facetious,
Yeah, no,
but Have they been introduced to this concept to at least see that through 60% design, 100% design, that we're not going to run into a challenge with the 38th bureaucrat that needs to sign off on this thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, you guys know way better than me that I'm not here to try to be a stargazer about that 38 bureaucrat. But the answer to your question is yes. So both from us, but also through the Army Corps team that did do that feasibility work, they have been introduced to these concepts, only as concepts. Obviously, we're far ahead of any permits being applied for and all that. But the other party, of course, as Commissioner Nimitz knows, very well, is the state of Indiana. It also has to issue a permit and has also been introduced to this. So this is not a new idea or concept to any of them. They can't, of course, really respond until we go down the road of proper engineering designs.
So Mr. Repay, as it relates to the design and how a feasibility study, is the feasibility study that you're aware of incorporating the east side of I-65 as well? Or is it stopped just at the expressway and not taking into consideration what happens on the other side of I-65?
This project?
Well, I think the entire system is a project. So, I mean, this has a huge impact across the watershed. So I would hope they just didn't look at this little area and that's it.
But only so much water can make it underneath I-65 through that culvert. So that's why I think they're gonna check through. I think you guys did some initial checks with the hydraulic department at the Corps to make sure that it didn't negatively impact the flood. So as it was designed by the Corps.
They specifically, in the feasibility state, specifically reviewed that question with the hydrologic. I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I think
The
I
hydrologic department.
Mr. Chairman, I think, Executive Director Repay's report that said something about moving, what were you talking about earlier, Commissioner Whitaker, Hobart, Lake George Dam, if we can get water through Deep River faster, it helps the system, the Little Cow. So this is kind of the other side of the coin. This is slowing down the water on this side of it. So it's all good, right? And it'll still flood.
And in Gary, it's already slowed down. That's how it's designed by the Corps that's why you see the larger impacts, the larger pieces of land. I mean, from levee to levee, it could be a mile or so, whereas in Highland and Hammond, you can see right across from them. So it's designed to store water. This will slow it down further and probably purify it and make it less sediment. The sediment should stay here as opposed to downstream.
Yeah, the sediment thing is very interesting, and of course, very welcome. This is this area is mostly already a wetlands, just not a very healthy wetlands. This will make it a better sponge. We call wetlands nature sponges. This will improve the sponge in all the ways that have been asked about.
I mean, just so you know, most of this land is either farmed by us, not most, half maybe,
Right.
but by us and Gary Parks Department.
Right.
And there is one more party that's got a direct stake in all this, which of course is NiSource. It's not really visible on it. We can sort of see it on this image, but it's not really super clear. But they have the, you want to go to the previous one?
Well, I figured show that.
Yeah, it's right there. There you go. Yeah, that's that right. So they go right through there. They're a project partner. They're on board. We've met with them. They're actually now starting to fund this work in a pretty exciting way. And so they're totally on board, and obviously also a party that is looking for that 60% design document and so forth, because it directly affects that potentially.
I have a couple questions.
Please.
First of all, I want to compliment you. It's a fantastic design. I think it's going to be a great part for the city of Gary. But I had a couple of questions. One, how much money are you looking for in order to complete this total project? Second, is the Audubon Society putting anything into this particular project? And what is going to be the recreation value for the city of Marshalltown?
Well, let's go in reverse order, because the recreational value is at the heart, of course, of the public engagement that we've already done and that we're going to do in a more intensive way, as Daniel described. And that effort is led by Audubon, which has a lot of expertise in doing that with communities adjacent to projects like this. And so I think, but members of the community will further inform us as to their wishes on this, but there's enormous recreational potential here. The community is already recreating. I was startled the first time I discovered local folks out there fishing in that little triangle area there next to the railroad culverts, and they were having a high old time and on the right conditions, getting some great fish. They're not fishing in the segments below it because there's no fish passage. And they're not fishing in that straight ditch there because there's no particular good place to do it.
I
But
know those
they liked
spots.
it.
Right.
And so we've gotten that feedback already,
Right.
but there's also the potential here. You're talking about paths, you're talking about overlooks,
Right.
you're talking about really lovely spaces. Bringing this kind of benefit, this kind of community asset directly to these communities. You don't have to go drive to go do it. That's very exciting. So you asked about, the three questions. Well, first was the cost, the second was, the third was the community.
Yeah, well, the question I had for the Audubon Society itself,
Oh,
it's such a
yeah.
huge organization.
We are all
Want to
putting
find out,
funds in.
are they
Yes.
putting anything into the
Absolutely.
financing?
All of our organizations, my organization, which of course is much smaller than his, but my organization, as well as the Nature Conservancy of Indiana, right now is putting in their, helping to pay for the crew supervisor now, which is direct match. And Lake County Parks has already put some funds into this. They're actually have the crew and the payroll, as you may recall. So all of us are fundraising and putting in match at our various scales for all of this work. Right here, the initial ballpark estimate you're gonna see in that 60% design is for the grand total of all of this with all the earth moving is in the range of $15 to $18 million.
Okay.
We think we can shave that, but we'll see. My organization and his and TNC all having lots of experience in moving dirt for this purpose, kind of why we exist. So that's a story yet to be told. And I don't know what the cost estimate of getting to the 100% design is. It's much smaller than where we are.
Just for the engineering
Just
work
to do the
itself,
engineering.
probably in the ballpark of like 150 to.
Yeah, okay, so that's not it.
150,000.
The heavy lifting is, but you're gonna be in 8 figures here. There's no question about that.
That's a massive project, and I think that the whole state of Indiana would be proud to do that. But I have one last question.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of artistic drawing of it, that what it's gonna look like?
There will be.
There
So
will
we had asked the engineers if they could complete a rendering. We had a meeting on Friday where they shared this design. We said we need something a little bit more visually appealing to people who don't know how to read engineering plans. And they thought that they would be able to share something with us by today, but that will be included in the 60% design. Not just one rendering. We asked for a couple of renderings showing some of these areas, what they might look like with people in them also. So those are forthcoming.
And one last question. You said you got NIPSCO involved as far as the funding source.
Mhm.
How about trying Nippon Steel? This is a suggestion. And we'll become there. Next time I have to do that. Thank you.
The acquisition.
For the record.
All right, any other questions for these gentlemen?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Paul and Daniel, thank you for being here. Appreciate you and appreciate the presentation. Paul, you mentioned a story yet to be told, but just for some clarification, the Little Calumet River Basin Development Commission has worked with the collaborative, mostly on invasive plant control, on bird monitoring and prescribed fire, a variety of things. Well, not so much the creation of wetlands.
Right.
And so we have wetlands that have been protected and that you are improving habitat. But can you talk to your experience on actually creating wetlands and what that might look like from us? Also, thinking about the design, I look at the photograph in front of us and I think in the lower left corner, that's marsh. There used to be a low head dam down in there that has been removed, and there have been muskrats and beaver that have flooded at different times of the year. And I understand moving that course of water in there because it naturally wants to do it, as you mentioned. And then there's the waterfall underneath the railroad tracks.
Mhm.
I would recommend starting those conversations with the railroad company because that is a pinch point. I mean, as you said, fish aren't going up the waterfall.
Right.
And that's a culvert under the railroad tracks. So if that hasn't happened yet, that's something you might want to do.
Sure.
But can you talk about your experience and what we might expect in the creation of wetlands?
So, my organization, the Wetlands Initiative, as well as Audubon and Nature Conservancy of Indiana, all have direct experience doing exactly this kind of work. Moving dirt and planting and, resculpting an area to make a healthy we still use the phrase multi-benefit project kind of wetland. My organization was put on the map 25 years ago with a 3,000 acre site in Illinois along the Illinois River, where it had been farmed, levied off, pump station, drainage district, farmed for 75 years, flat. We have the photos. And there was a point as of about 1999 when the 8 families that owned it, formed that drainage district, were kind of, well, they were actually falling out with each other. They were looking at $1 million bill to try to repair their levee. The Army Corps was on their back. Then the Army Corps washed their hands of them, which you guys know what that must have been like. And so our fledgling organization found some financing and purchased it on the idea that this area that again had been drained and levied and flat for 75 years could be restored to real health, a real wetlands, as who you're referencing, with the kinds of productivity and public access benefits that you're talking about here. And there were people in conservation, our peers, with organizations such as Nature Conservancy, were very skeptical, say, I'm not sure you guys can pull that off, but I'm not sure if you can, that it'll be while anybody living will be around to see it. Well, I'm happy to say, as a startup, you don't have to listen to the naysayers. So our 2 founders raised the money, went ahead and did it, and today it is called the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. It is a beloved site. It's on every birder list in the Midwest. It is a Ramsar wetland of international importance. It gets public visitation like crazy, and it is very similar to this. We moved a lot of dirt 3 different times. We also had to do a lot of other stuff that doesn't apply here. So that is really the foundation of our organization. And I know for a fact, Daniel referenced big projects that Audubon's been involved with around the Great Lakes at big sites that are disconnected, that are channelized, that are all these things. They know how to do the design and move through and do implementation with partners. Certainly Lake County Parks, you all know better than me, is an agency that has become a restoration agency. They have done wetlands. I don't think they've done a wetland as big as this yet. So we're helping them raise their game, but they know how to do a lot of this stuff. And Nature Conservancy is, you know, the biggest in our sector, and they have expertise at scales even beyond what either of us have been involved with. So I think you have all the right expertise here. And the last thing I'll say is, it is not an accident that my organization, the top level of our program team, is 2 people that lead it. A PhD ecologist, as you'd expect, and who you know, Gary Sullivan, and a PhD environmental engineer. And that's baked in, because if you're going to restore and create wetlands in urban and suburban areas where you have constraints, the railroad isn't moving, those culverts aren't moving, none of that stuff is moving, you're working with what you have here, you have to have the engineering knowledge. Otherwise, you will fail, plain and simple. So that's how we look at it. And so I believe actually very strongly that this collaborative has the right expertise to pull this off.
Thank you.
Any other questions for these gentlemen?
Just one last question. Is there any significance to the bottom left corner that their commission amendments reference those 2? Those 2 locations that are opposite each other.
Those 2 dark spots right here, those are potential spoil piles where we could build up the land, elevate it a little bit, and potentially connect it to trails at Ironwood Park.
That's where you could have a lookout. That would be maybe a nice platform up overlooking the wetland. You know, make good use of the spoilers you have.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.